When I first got the job at Lenton and Morris Consulting, I was ecstatic. It wasn't just the pay, or the sleek high-rise downtown office, or even the unlimited PTO that drew me in, it was the culture. Or, rather, what they claimed the culture was. From the very first interview, the recruiter went on and on about how the company valued radical openness and psychological safety. I must have heard those phrases a dozen times before even setting foot in the building. According to them, it was a place where every voice mattered, from the fresh-faced intern to the senior VP. "We don't believe in top-down hierarchies of ideas," the hiring manager told me. "We believe the truth can come from anywhere." That line stuck with me. It was idealistic, sure, but kind of thrilling. After years working for companies where feedback meant sit down and shut up, this felt different. And in the beginning, it was. On my first day, HR gave us glossy welcome packets with the words transparency, trust, teamwork printed in bold letters. We were shown videos of executives talking candidly about mistakes they'd made. There were even monthly open mic sessions called Pulse Forums, where employees could speak their minds about anything, workflow inefficiencies, management styles, even company policy. The only rule? Be respectful and constructive. I was impressed. As a data analyst on the strategy team, I quickly noticed a few workflow issues. Our reporting systems were unnecessarily fragmented. Some departments were manually duplicating reports that others had already automated. It was all fixable, and I thought if openness was truly encouraged, I should say something. 3 weeks in, I attended my first Pulse Forum. It was held in the spacious 12th floor conference room, filled with couches, beanbags, and snacks. It felt like a TED Talk crossed with a casual coffee hangout. Employees were encouraged to take the mic and voice their concerns or suggestions. There was even a small panel of managers and HR reps who'd respond in real time. I hesitated at first. But then I thought about all the onboarding messages, the slogans on the wall, the CEO's welcome video, and I raised my hand. Walking to the microphone felt like stepping into a spotlight, but I kept my voice steady. "I've been looking at how different teams handle reporting," I began. "And I noticed we're spending a lot of time doing duplicate work across departments. I think if we created a central system for sharing SQL templates or set up a task force to unify our tools, it could save time and reduce errors." I paused. People nodded. Some even murmured in agreement. One of the VPs smiled and said, "That's a thoughtful suggestion. Let's take a closer look." I returned to my seat with a slight adrenaline rush. Not only had I spoken up, I felt heard. For the next few days, colleagues stopped by my desk and thanked me for bringing it up. A junior dev said he'd been thinking the same thing for months but didn't feel comfortable saying it. My manager even dropped me a Slack message, "Bold move at the forum. Let's discuss it further next week." It felt like I'd done the right thing. But I had no idea that I had just crossed an invisible line. The week after the Pulse Forum, I walked into the office with a small sense of pride. It wasn't arrogance, just the quiet confidence that comes from contributing something useful. My Slack notifications had calmed down, but a few colleagues were still stopping by, casually tossing around phrases like, "You really said what we've all been thinking," or "It's about time someone brought that up." But then, things shifted. Subtly at first. I noticed that my manager, Grant, postponed our follow-up meeting twice. He'd originally said, "Let's build on that momentum," but now I was getting vague responses like, "Things are hectic, circle back next week." He stopped commenting on my reports, too. Not in a malicious way, just a sudden, chilly silence where there used to be engagement. A week later, I was excluded from a planning meeting I'd always been part of. When I asked a coworker, she gave me a half shrug and said, "Oh, I thought you were looped in. Maybe they assumed you were working on something else." Something else? I brushed it off. People get busy. Calendars get messy. It's corporate life. But then came the email. Subject, performance check-in request. It was from HR, polite, professionally worded, but unexpected. I had only been at the company a little over a month. A check-in sounded innocuous, but the moment I stepped into the conference room, I realized it wasn't just a friendly chat. Grant was already there, seated stiffly. Beside him sat Carly from HR, who greeted me with an exaggerated warmth that immediately made my stomach twist. "We just wanted to touch base," she began, "about a few concerns." "Concerns?" Grant chimed in, avoiding eye contact. "We've noticed some friction. Particularly around your collaboration style." I blinked. "Can you be more specific?" Carly smiled like a schoolteacher trying to soothe a child. "It's about your participation in last week's Pulse Forum. Some team members felt your comments could be interpreted as critical of other departments. A bit combative." My mouth went dry. I thought it was encouraged to share ideas openly. I said carefully. "I was trying to suggest improvements, not criticize anyone." Carly gave a rehearsed nod. "And we do appreciate innovation. But it's also important to consider tone and timing. Sometimes feedback, even if well-intended, can feel disruptive." Disruptive. The word hung in the air like a verdict. I sat there, stunned, as they gently but firmly advised me to collaborate more cautiously, and to route feedback through my direct supervisor moving forward. In other words, stay in your lane, and keep your ideas to yourself unless someone explicitly asks for them. That afternoon, my access to a few shared dashboards was mysteriously revoked. Nothing major, just tools I'd used daily. When I emailed IT, they said it was a permissions audit. Sure. A few days later, I was quietly reassigned from the high-profile strategy initiative I'd been excited about. No explanation. When I asked Grant, he said, "We thought it might be a better fit for someone else, bandwidth and all." Bandwidth. Right. What struck me most wasn't the demotion itself, it was how polite everything stayed on the surface. There was no yelling, no confrontation, no HR complaint filed against me. Just a slow, coordinated removal from anything that mattered. The same people who once clapped when I spoke now avoided my gaze in the hallway. It was clear, I had embarrassed someone. Or maybe several someones. And in a company that preached openness, the real sin wasn't saying the wrong thing, it was saying the right thing too publicly. I started keeping my head down. That's not easy to do in an office like ours, all glass walls, open floor plans, and cheerful mantras painted above doorways. Speak your truth. Growth comes from discomfort. No egos, no silos. Ironically, it was because of all that glass that I couldn't hide. People could see me, see that I wasn't being looped into the usual meetings anymore, that I was eating lunch alone, that my Slack went eerily quiet after 11 a.m. each day. The change was slow, but deliberate. And it wasn't just about access or assignments anymore. It was the way people looked at me. There was a difference between being forgotten and being marked. I was marked. One morning, I came in early. Just to get ahead of the awkwardness, and saw two team leads chatting by the coffee bar. They didn't see me coming, and one of them said, "Well, you know how it is. You speak out once, and suddenly you're on the unofficial list." The other one nodded. "Yeah. Grant warned me not to bring her into the Simmons project. Said she had alignment issues." Alignment issues. That phrase clanged in my head like an alarm. It was company speak for she doesn't play the game. I stood frozen behind the hallway divider, coffee mug in hand, heart pounding so loudly I thought they might hear it. That moment confirmed everything I'd been too rational to believe until then. This wasn't just a string of coincidences. It was calculated. That week, I tried to salvage what I could. I volunteered to help with a smaller analytics task no one seemed to want. It was repetitive and beneath my skill set, but I hoped it would signal something like humility or eagerness. When I submitted the draft to Grant, he replied 3 days later with a single sentence. Thanks. I'll loop in someone to check it over. No notes. No questions. Not even a typo fix. Just passed along like I was a temp. I should have been angry. Instead, I felt small, like I'd been politely shown the door without anyone needing to say the words. Still, part of me wanted to believe that maybe I could ride it out. Companies shift all the time. Cultures evolve. Maybe if I just focused on doing good work, this would blow over. I clung to that hope the way someone clings to a raft in open water, not because it was sturdy, but because it was the only thing keeping me from drowning. But then came the review. Not the usual 6-month performance review. This was labeled as a 360 reflection, a newer initiative, apparently meant to foster self-awareness and feedback loops across teams. I got a copy of my peer feedback a day before my meeting with HR. Out of 7 responses, 5 were positive. They praised my efficiency, said I was detail-oriented and quick to spot issues others missed. But 2 responses stood out. She can come across as rigid or overly critical during group discussions. Sometimes it feels like she thinks she's the smartest person in the room. I felt like someone had punched me in the gut. I knew those weren't just casual impressions, those were planted. Or at least, influenced by the whisper campaign around me. In my meeting, Carly from HR used those 2 lines as a jumping-off point. "We think you're incredibly skilled," she said, "but we want to support you in developing a more collaborative posture." I bit the inside of my cheek to keep from saying something I'd regret. Collaborative posture. What a beautiful phrase to dress up punishment. Then, almost as an afterthought, she said, "We're assigning you a coach, someone to help you grow into the cultural values we hold dear." A coach. They were going to reprogram me. That night, I sat in my apartment, laptop closed, staring at the blank wall of my living room. I didn't cry. I didn't rant. I just sat there, exhausted, hollow, and deeply, deeply betrayed. I had believed them. I had believed in the posters and the mantras and the Pulse Forum. But behind all that glass, the truth was simple: openness was a branding tool. Silence was policy. And I had broken it. It was during that coaching session, the first one, that I decided I was done playing defense. My assigned coach, Jason, was an external consultant with a corporate smile and a voice like a meditation app. We sat in a corner meeting room that overlooked the city skyline. He greeted me warmly and pulled out a neat leather notebook. "This is a safe space," he said, flipping it open. "We're just here to reflect. To evolve." He talked about active listening, humility, tone mirroring, and emotional contagion. Buzzwords that sounded progressive but felt like a performance review disguised as therapy. For an hour, he asked questions like, "Do you think you sometimes speak with unintended authority? And how do you think others might perceive your confidence?" I played along. Nodded. Smiled. Took notes like a good student. But deep down, something in me had snapped. Not emotionally, intellectually. If this company wanted to label me a problem, fine. But I was done pretending that the problem was mine alone. I didn't want revenge. I wanted the truth. And as a data analyst, I knew exactly where to look. Over the next 2 weeks, I began compiling a quiet archive. I didn't need to hack anything, everything I needed was public: project dashboards, team participation logs, timeline tracking software, old email threads. I pulled together cold, hard numbers. How many projects I'd contributed to in my short tenure, how many hours I'd logged fixing inefficiencies, how many reports I'd generated, and how many had been adopted across teams. Then I pulled comparison data. I ran metrics on peers in similar roles, anonymized, of course. I wasn't trying to name names. I was trying to build a case. My findings? Clear as day. My output was 22% higher than the department average. My ticket resolution time was 41% faster. And the SQL library I had quietly shared with other analysts? It had been downloaded internally over 60 times, despite being ignored in formal meetings. I packaged it all into a tidy, well-structured document. No bitterness. Just numbers, citations, hyperlinks. I called it Contribution versus Perception, a review of quantitative performance metrics. And I did the unthinkable, I submitted it to HR. I didn't send it with drama or threats. I simply added a short note. In light of recent feedback, I thought it might be useful to provide a data-based overview of my contributions over the last 3 months. I remain committed to improvement, but I believe clarity starts with facts. I knew it was risky. But I also knew they wouldn't dare ignore it completely, not in a company that branded itself as data-forward. The reaction came faster than I expected. 2 days later, I got a meeting invite from HR. This time, it wasn't Carly. It was Vanessa, the director of People and Culture. I'd only seen her at company-wide events. She didn't do small stuff. I walked into the glass room with my shoulders squared. Vanessa greeted me with a firm handshake and a printed copy of my report on the table. "I've read your analysis," she said evenly. "It's thorough." We sat. She didn't offer coffee or a smile. But she also didn't scold me. "What's your goal here?" she asked. I hesitated. Then answered honestly. "My goal," I said, "is to not be punished for doing what this company says it values. I've worked hard. I've spoken up when encouraged. And I've been slowly sidelined for it. If we're going to talk about performance, let's talk about it with the whole picture in mind, not just whispers and tone concerns." Vanessa looked at me for a long moment. "You've made waves," she said finally. "And waves have consequences. Even in companies that claim to like water." I didn't respond. What was there to say to that? After a pause, she added, "We'll review your concerns and get back to you." That night, I went home with no answers, but for the first time in weeks, I didn't feel powerless. I had held up a mirror. Whether they wanted to look or not was up to them. But me? I was already planning my next move. 2 weeks passed. No formal reply. No acknowledgement of my report beyond that single meeting with Vanessa. The office returned to its polite frost. The team continued without me, meetings happening behind closed glass doors I used to be invited into. The Pulse forums continued, too, still glossy, still recorded, still full of smiles and safe ideas. And me? I waited. Not because I expected justice, I'd already buried that hope, but because I wanted to give them time. Time to prove whether their talk of openness was a mission or just marketing. They chose marketing. That Friday, I received an official HR email, Performance Development Plan Assignment. It was sugar-coated, of course. They said it was a structured opportunity to reflect and realign. But I knew the truth. It was the first step in nudging me out, quietly and with documentation. The company wouldn't fire me. They'd just make it uncomfortable enough for me to leave. And so I did. But not the way they expected. I spent the weekend preparing. I wasn't going to storm out or leave a dramatic note on Slack. That wasn't my style. If they wanted tidy, I'd give them tidy, just with a twist. On Monday, I submitted my resignation. 2 weeks' notice, professional, courteous. But attached to it was something else. A final presentation, titled Open Feedback in Closed Cultures, Lessons from the Inside. It wasn't petty. It wasn't emotional. It was precise. I laid out a timeline of my contributions. Specific examples of feedback I had given and how it was received. Patterns of exclusion and retaliation. Data visualizations comparing productivity, cross-departmental efficiency losses, and disengagement trends. A concluding section with recommendations for how the company could live up to the values it claimed to hold. I CC'd the entire leadership team. Not to shame, but to ensure it wouldn't be buried. Then, I posted a shorter, polished version of that same presentation on LinkedIn. I didn't name names. I didn't drag the company. I just told the story. I joined a company that preached openness. I gave feedback when asked. I was punished for doing exactly what they encouraged. Here's what I learned, and how we can build better cultures moving forward. It took off. Comments poured in. Hundreds of reactions. Dozens of private messages from people I didn't know, and from people inside the company, too. Some wrote, "I felt this in my soul." Others said, "You just told my story." And then, something unexpected happened. A recruiter from a competitor, someone I'd met once at a conference, reached out. He said they'd seen the post, admired the clarity and courage, and had an opening for a lead analyst with a strong voice and a backbone. 3 weeks later, I started at my new job. Different city. Different team. No beanbags. No radical openness slogans on the wall. Just real people, doing real work, with room for honesty and growth. I still think about Lenton and Morris Consulting sometimes. Not with anger, but with clarity. It wasn't a bad place. It was a pretend place. A company more concerned with looking like it cared than actually listening when someone spoke. They wanted openness until openness made them uncomfortable. And when it did, I gave them exactly what they asked for, just a little louder than they expected.